You know how in the strategy video games like Civilization and all those games, every nation had a superpower? I always thought, in reality, what would be the superpower of Iran? And I always come to the same conclusion. It's poetry. Poetry would be the superpower of Iran. Now, today I'm standing in the garden and tomb of Hafez. And Hafez is almost universally considered the pinnacle of Persian poetry. He lived about 600 years ago, and to most Iranian, he would be their favorite poet, the top poet. But unfortunately, Hafez is not as famous in the Western world as some of the other Iranian poets like Rumi or Khayyam. But in Iran, certainly Hafez would be number one, would be the most favorite. Even though all the other ones people really love them, but Hafez would be number one. Now, the thing with Hafez is, even though he's not famous in the West, in general public, he was actually very famous in the intellectual courts. For example, Goethe, the German poet, was a big fan of Hafez, and he was so much inspired by Hafez, and he wrote so much about him. Or Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes, he was a big fan of Hafez, and in some of his books, Sherlock Holmes is actually quoting Hafez. Or actually really funny, there's a ceremony that Iranian people love to do, and that's consulting Hafez. So they open up when they have a big decision to make, or they want to, they get stuck or something. They open the book of Hafez randomly, and Hafez tells them an inspiration that is going to help them through their journey. And interestingly, I learned that Queen Victoria of England was also a big fan of this ceremony, and she would consult Hafez for making some of her decisions or whenever she felt stuck. Now, poetry, of course, is an art form, and just like many other types of art form, like sculpting or painting, there are different levels to the artist and how they express themselves. One of my spiritual teachers told me something really interesting about the different level of art. And he said the first level of art would be an artist who express themselves by narrating or copying nature. So this is a narrating artist, and that's when an artist starts on their journey of learning and creating, they would typically start here by copying nature or narrating what they see in nature. The second level would be a creative artist. So this is an artist who would create something which doesn't exist in nature. Of course, they would get their inspiration from whatever they can see, observe in nature, in reality, and then they would create something new that doesn't exist. Now, if you go one level up, it would be an imaginative artist. An imaginative artist is a type of artist who put a lot of emotional turbulence into their creativity, because as humans, we are full of emotional turbulence. We have various emotions, and they can express those emotions to a very high level, and they can put it into their creation. The last level of artists would be the ones that you can only see a very few of them in the history, and that would be transcendental artists. Transcendental artists are the type of artists that have moved beyond the natural world and the physical world, and their art form tells us a story beyond nature. They tells us a story of an underlying truth and the underlying reality that exists, which may not be obvious in our day-to-day life. Examples of these artists, in my opinion, would be people like Michelangelo, the famous sculptor and painter from Renaissance time, or Da Vinci, for example. Hafez, definitely I would consider him. Shakespeare would be another one. And these are people who would be at the top of their game, and you can read their work, look at their work after hundreds of years or even sometimes thousands of years, and they still feel relevant, and they can still help you today even when you feel stuck. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed this video.